Okay, there we go. So, today we're going to be talking about introducing fantasy and science fiction concepts without info dumping, specifically. Hello, please close the door behind you. Thank you. So, with introducing fantasy and science fiction concepts, it's incredibly times, right? You end up being like, hey, oh my gosh, here's all these things about my world. And you get so excited that you just kind of bleh all over the page. And then the readers are like, what is that? Um, so it may sound good when you're writing it down because you think your world is super cool. And it is super cool. But if you're writing it like a textbook, everyone's just going to be overwhelmed and stressed. And that's basically what info dumping is. When you write something instead of telling, without using tactful telling, without using any of the good principles, you just straight up write it like a textbook of your world building. It's like, here's 5 fun facts about the various places that we went to. Plague. And it's like, why? Why do we care? Why do we want to acknowledge this? Also, sometimes you might run into this problem where you need to get information across. So you're in the middle of a really cool scene with a really cool character, and then all of a sudden they're just going, by the way, words. And why are we going on for 5 pages about this? We were in the middle of having him nearly dig someone. And now we're just word vomit about this. Like, what is happening? So, not that telling information is important. Telling information is good. If your world is illogical and confusing to your readers, that is bad. However, it is also equally bad completely and utterly be like, hi, readers, here's a giant plate of cake. Eat it all. It's like, okay. Exactly. You are basically being the one evil lady from Matilda if you info dump because you're like, eat it all. Eat the whole chocolate cake. And they're like, I don't want to. So that's why we want to avoid info dumping. Now, after having defined info dumping, here are some ways to appropriately avoid it and insert said information without just making them eat the whole cake. Give it to them slice by slice. So, give them world building diabetes.
Here's the knife of info.
Yes, exactly. So, first thing you can use is characters. How do they naturally interact with these things? Sometimes all you need to do is show them interacting with these things, and that will be enough for the reader. They can figure things out just by watching. They can go, oh, hey, they're interacting with this kind of rude, mean sort of way. I bet that people look down on androids. And so you're like, okay, I got this. You don't need to say they looked at it down on androids because blah, blah, blah. Just have them be mean to the android. They got it. Also have things for fantasy with how do they naturally interact with various creatures. If you have some sort of crazy scary monster and the person is just absolutely terrified or it has their eyes squeezed shut, then the reader goes, oh, okay, why are their eyes squeezed shut? Are they in fear? Could they turn them to stone if they see them? Is there some sort of hypnotic gaze? Like, it gets the reader's mind turning. And then you can slowly reveal things as the action unfolds. You don't have to just tell them everything about how does. All right, next thing is doesn't know about this or is particularly naive and needs to learn about it. This technique was obviously used in Percy Jackson and Harry Potter. Percy Jackson was not raised anywhere near or knowing about demigods or any of that crap. So when he gets tossed into the middle of it, a lot of explaining needs to be done doesn't feel as info dumpy because he's genuinely like, I have no idea what's going on. And so when someone then says, blah, 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 here's what's going on, it doesn't feel forced. It feels organic and natural. Um, if you don't have a character who needs to learn about something and you are just like, I don't know, I mean, everyone's an expert in this particular area, but I still need to get this information across, you can have a lot of internal dialogue that can work too. And you can add some action to flavor it. So, for instance, if you have someone who is thinking about how their friend was murdered or something like that, instead of saying blah 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 blah, this is how they were murdered, blah blah blah, blah for like three paragraphs, and having us go, why are we just going on a tangent about murder? Um, Instead, being like having the character, sitting there gripping their pencil and class knuckles white because it seems like everyone's just moved on and everything's normal. And how could they be so normal? He just died, like that intensity is going to give us that a new flavor to this, and especially because then they can think about like, I remember the way that I found him. There was blood everywhere. You don't have to say how he died, but we immediately are like, I can picture that. I have an idea of how he died. I have an idea of what's going on here. Um, so in some ways, it is about giving the information without just going, here's the information. It's about, here's a hint of information that will help guide the reader along the correct path. All right, next thing. Do you have a nerd character? These are incredibly helpful too. Think of Hermione Granger, where she's just like, I did a bit of light reading, blah, 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 blah. Having the nerd character is helpful because of the fact that they can, because that's part of who they are. We all have met someone who is like that, where you're like, they know a lot, and you are like, tell me about this topic. And then for like 5 minutes, they will be the information this topic, and it's great, right? But at the same time, as a writer, you can use this great attribute that nerds have to be able to info dump without feeling unnatural, because a lot of people do that when they're super excited about something. I know I do that. I am one of those people. Tell me about, you don't know about Dungeons and Dragons. Uh-oh, you better be prepared for me not to shut up. So as a result, that would be a great way of info dumping. If someone didn't know about Dungeons and Dragons and I was a character in a novel, they'd be like, I don't know how to play D&D, and I'd be like, did someone say D&D? And then suddenly they know all about D&D. Exactly. All right, the next thing is to slip it into the conversation naturally or slip it into the background. So, a great example of this is with Harry Potter, how on the train he was looking through all those cards that you can get from the Chocolate Frogs, and he was like, hey, I got this card for this cool, like, Nicholas Flamel. And Ron was like, I don't have him yet. He's so cool. Here's all the things that he did and why I want to collect this card. And then, of course, it does actually apply to the plot. But it just feels like a cool world building little random thing at the time. You can also slip it into the action. This is called the Chekhov's gun principle, where basically you have someone doing something with the thing that will be used. I just saw this on a TV show last night, where someone was possessed by an evil spirit and used a hammer to murder someone. But before then, they had someone nailing something with the hammer. So as a result, you were like, oh, we're focusing on the hammer a lot. For some reason, your brain kind of goes, why are we focusing on the hammer? And then murdered with hammer. Ah, that's why we focused on the hammer. So you can do the same principle with slipping information into the conversation. Don't just be like, hey, here's all the information you need to have the plot make sense. Teeny little speckles throughout the entire thing. You can introduce something really early. You can introduce something really late. You can introduce something partway through. Introduce something as part of a class, something that they're learning, like that. All those information bits can be helpful, especially considering the fact that it feels a lot less overwhelming to be following instead of the whole deal. Exactly. If you're eating little slices bit by bit, you're like, oh, this is great. But if you're just being told eat the whole dang cake, you're like, no. So don't stress out your readers. Give them slices instead of murder cake. So, last thing that you can do with characters before I move on to a different principle. Hold on, trying to get this to scroll. Is to have a mentor character. So this is similar to the nerd character or having the naive character that gets told all the things. The difference here is that with the mentor character is explaining things that the average universe may not know. And that way you can give a lot of these types of things. Sorry, this is hurting my ear. I'm going to have to readjust it. So a great example of this is in Star Wars, right? Where you have them learning about the Force from other mentors and things like that. They aren't just master of the Force, and guess what? I'm going to tell you all about the Force. Slowly teaching it to someone else. And so not only do you get to see the successes and failures of this character and therefore relate to them a lot more and be more intrigued by them, but you also get to see how the average person would learn about these things. And that can be incredibly. All right, next thing, talking about individual scenes. So, types of scenes that can help convey information. Like I said, scene where they're perseverating on something really dark or really tragic that just happened, or something they're really mad about. That can be a great way to convey a lot of information, is just that internal dialogue of, I can't believe I was fooled. How dare that man fool me? Or something like that. You know, it feels like villain monologue, but the reason it's not is because we think about those kinds of things, don't we? I mean, when we're mad, we're like, oh, geez, I can't believe I messed up. And we think about it for like a while. And so, similarly, your characters can do the same thing, and it doesn't feel villain monologue-y or monologue-y because of the fact that your character is just genuinely perseverating on something that a normal person would. All right. Next thing is experiencing things and coming up with their own theories as to how they work. So you can also, instead of a character who doesn't know anything and is therefore explained to, they can have a character who doesn't know anything and experiences them and then theorizes about them. A great example of this was in the newest Hunger Games novel. There was a lot of that where they were like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on here. This whole arena is so confusing. And then he would theorize based on what he was experiencing. Haymitch would go, oh my gosh, two people just died and I feel queasy. It's because the fruit is poisoned. I'm like, coming to conclusions. He didn't have to say the fruit is poisoned. He's like, oh, I've been poisoned. That's so much more interesting. And then it's also more interesting when you have things where they're observing creatures. At one point, they run into some sort of crazy creature. I won't spoil it for you guys. But the whole time, he's like, I've heard rumors about what these creatures are like, but I've never run into one before. I think that maybe they do this, this, and that, and thinking about different things that they might do in order to avoid this creature and deal. So that can also be an incredibly interesting way to convey information, is through them experiencing something. This way you're showing and not telling, and even if you're tactfully telling, you're telling through their own information. A great example of tactfully telling is going um, kind of similar to paraphrasing what Hamish was thinking. Um, these creatures being talked about, but I don't think that was actually a real thing. I think that was a myth. But knowing the game makers, they could totally turn that myth into an actual reality. And so, like, that feels like info dumping, but it's not. And the reason internal dialogue of him theorizing, because that's what a normal person does. Um, Next thing is being able to give foreshadowing. So, if there is something incredibly important that they have not learned but they will need to learn, feel free to even say that and be like, we need to learn more about this particular group, or we need to learn more about this type of magic. And with that, you can have them learn things about it as they go along, instead of just being like, here's a history book, let's read. um, have a history book, but half of it's water damaged or something like that. That's oftentimes why they do things like that, like the pages are ripped out, or there's water damage, or different things like that, is so that way you don't have 5 chapters of them reading a history book. So that's why that's such a cliche that is used so often, is where it's like, we're going to acknowledge that history books exist, but oh no, this one just so happened to be ruined. So I don't have to input up. Might run into that a lot, and why it might seem tropey. So if you do want to avoid that, I would say just say the library is too far away, or say they don't have any knowledge on that specific thing because it's forbidden. Those are all ways around doing the oh no, the book is destroyed trope. um, Next thing is, as I've been saying this whole time, but wanted to reiterate, actions speak louder than words. If you have 5 pages talking about how terrible this specific cult is, we're going to be bored and go honk shoot. But if you have 1 paragraph having someone talking about the trauma they went through during this cult, that is incredibly captivating. Even if it belies all the same information, if someone is sharing about their traumatic cult experience, we're all like, wow, instead of being like, oh. um, so having people about something traumatic can also be a great way to info dump, but keep the tension, because then someone is sharing their story and we are invested because we like that character. All right. Last 2 things that I'm going to talk about are involving dialogue. First thing that you want to avoid when you are doing the dialogue info dump, because this can be a problem, is what's called maid and butler dialogue. So this is from the old like 1920s movies where the maid would come in and say, "As you know, you have to wash the master's Pomeranian before 7 p.m. because he will be here at exactly 7:15." And then it's like, "Why are you telling me this if you already know this?" You just said "as you know," so why? The only time that is acceptable if it's like with Hermione, where they're a know-it-all and they know that they already know this information, but she just wants to prove how smart she is. But if they're just saying the information for the benefit of the viewer slash reader, that's a problem. Yes, if you're trying to make fun of something or do a comedy, that's also acceptable. But I would say generally, if you're trying to have a serious moment, avoid the "as you know," lots of information that the reader needs to know, but you shouldn't care about.
Or if it's, as you know, no, I didn't know.
No, actually, I didn't know. That's fair. You can also do that. There's a lot of people who make fun of that actually, where they'll do things like, "As you know, vampires do this and that." And it's like, actually, I didn't know. That would have been really helpful 2 hours ago. You know, then they get really mad at them. All right. So next thing is make sure that if you do have a character who's ranting about something, they have a reason for it, whether it's because they're mad or because they're passionate, and make sure that it was actually brought up. So, for example, with me and Dungeons and Dragons, about Dungeons and Dragons all day, I would enjoy that very much. But at the same time, if I just talked about it for absolutely no reason, you guys would all be like, "Why are we here? I'm gonna stop listening." Um, but if you guys asked me a question about it and I went off on a rant, you're kind of like, "Oh no, I opened Pandora's box." Ah. um, but you know it's kind of your own fault, so you sit and listen even though you don't want to. That kind of that happens on occasion, right? And so as a result, you can have a similar thing with the ranting character. You need to make sure that it was brought up organically and that it doesn't just feel copy pasted in there. Also, if you are going to give information in a historical context, make sure you rephrase it in a way that the character would actually say it instead of just copy pasting a Wikipedia article. Um, I only say that because I've seen that in a few short stories. But where I'm like, okay, this is clearly a Wikipedia entry. But um, if the and the last thing we're going to talk about is with dialogue. If your description or dialogue is going on for more than 3 sentences of this specific topic, you either need to acknowledge it, like have someone go, "Hey, hey, whoa, calm down, maybe slower, tell me the information slower." That way it acknowledges that you're giving a lot of information. Or alternatively, if you're doing a lot of information just giving in general without dialogue, I would say either interrupt it with dialogue or delete, start over, because that is going to be info dumping. If you are describing something that long, be done by the end of 3 sentences. If you're going on to 4, 5, 6 sentences, at that point you are info dumping. And it's okay to info dump if you have it broken up by various things too. If you have a character be like, "Wait, wait, wait," kind of, you've seen those TV shows on occasion, right? Where they're going in the middle of explaining their story and they're in the middle of the scene, and then all of a sudden you hear the record scratch and they're like, "Wait, wait, wait, I don't think it happened like that. I don't believe you." And like it breaks things up so it makes it feel less info dumpy and more engaging and interesting. And you can do the same thing with your dialogue. If someone is going on and on and on, you can have them interrupt them. Or alternatively, if someone is not telling them enough information, they can be like, "Wait a minute, that doesn't sound right at all. What are you talking?" It can give you a lot of variety for making the text more engaging and less just facts on a page. All right. So, what happens if you need to get a lot of information out in a short period of time? Let's say you're in a prologue, or if you don't get all this information done, the climax is going to be a problem, kind of thing. It's not going to make sense. If you have the latter problem, where it's like, "Hey, if I don't get all this information out, the climax won't make sense," you moment where someone else info dumps on them, like Hermione. Or they have a moment where they're like, "Oh no, how are we going to survive?" And then they call the expert. And the expert's all like, "Do all this stuff." And they're like, "Thanks, bro." And they also outside info dumping kind of thing. That can really help make it a little more engaging if you really do need that. But in general, I would say if you're noticing you have like gobs and gobs of paragraphs that you need to explain before the climax makes sense, just write the climax and go back and fix it later. Because at that point it's too late. You should have put it before. It's gone. Your climax is going to be ruined with info dumping if you don't go back and just polish it later. That's what the second draft is for. Beauty of that. All right, and then with avoiding info dumping, the last thing that I would probably say you can do if you're trying to cram it all in one thing, for example, a short story or something that needs to be condensed, I would say that's when you use the internal thought. Because the internal thought thing is going to really get a lot of information across, but in a much more interesting way. Because you're interrupting it with how they're reacting to their thoughts. Because typically we don't just sit there like a robot staring off into space. And even if we do, people will be like, hey, hey, bro, and kind of try to snap you out of it. So as a result, having that internal thought monologue can make things much more interesting to not only listen to their thoughts and how they describe the facts instead of just stating facts. It's their version of the facts, their twist on the facts through their thoughts. But you also have things like I mentioned with the murder thing earlier, where maybe they're clenching their pencil until their knuckles turn white. Maybe if they are staring off into space, someone goes, "Hey, buddy, you okay there?" If they're in the middle of a baseball game and they have some sort of like revelation about who the killer is or something dramatic like that, and they get poked in the head with a baseball. You can add some flavor to interrupt said internal dialogue, but the internal dialogue itself is already more interesting because it is a thought of a character we care about. All right. Any other questions about getting science slash fantasy stuff onto the page without just sounding like a textbook? We good? Okay, cool. Then I'm just going to tell you briefly, obviously, as I do every week, because I don't know who's watching the videos when, so I just have to say it every week. Our next contest is the first chapter contest. You are allowed to write anything as long as it is not fan fiction. All other contests, fan fiction is fine. You please know that you will be probably -1 point if you do fan fiction in one category, just because of the fact that we do appreciate originality. But if it's an original twist on the fan fiction, we'll appreciate it any other time. This contest is exclusively for original content and material. Any first chapter that you want, though, it can be a romance, it can be a mystery, it can be a thriller, it can be a young adult contemporary novel, whatever you want. We even have a little category this year because we noticed a lot of people were turning in like children's books last year, and we were like, this is kind of hard to grade because I don't know if you're trying to do a children's book or if the writing is just really simple for no reason. So we even have a section this time that says like, what age range are you doing? And you can circle what age range of reader you're trying to aim for. That way we can grade it a little better and say, hey, okay, this makes sense for a beginning novel, but not so much for a young adult novel or different things like that. So we can kind of gauge based on age level. And then coming up in January, we will have a winter romance contest. That one is going to be also 3,000 words or less. Speaking of which, first chapter contest, 3,000 words or less. With the winter romance one, the prompt for that is write a romance story. It doesn't necessarily have to be like they meet and they fall in love. It can just be even them going on a romantic date. It has to involve romance somehow. And it has to also involve a winter holiday of some sort. It can be any holiday that you want as long as it takes place or took place during December and January. I say or took place because we absolutely encourage and would love to see any sort of either made-up holidays that you want to have for fantasy stuff, or alternatively, if you want to do like a Viking holiday that is no longer celebrated but was celebrated in December or something like that. You can do it whatever you want, man. You could do Krampus Day for all I care. Like, that's fun. As long as you have a romantic encounter, you also have a holiday that is themed around December and January time period. And we are very much looking forward to both the first chapter contest and that. So, thank you very much for listening to the lesson. I'm going to turn the lesson off. As usual for the YouTube people, if you have a lesson suggestion, feel free to comment below. And as for you guys, feel free to tell me if you're ever like, I came across this thing that I know nothing about this week. Can we have a lesson on it? And I will do so. I can't guarantee I will get to it soon because I have a list of like 8 of them, but feel free to say it anyway. All right, I'm going to turn the video off and we can just wait.